So having done that, we can go into a live interaction mode. I can stop sharing the slides now and we can look at questions on the chat. Okay, there is a question, can we get the links in our emails? Yes, the links will also be mailed to you. So what I am doing now is that I am going to the chat window and I will be looking at questions that are there in the chat, and then others are free to ask their questions either through the chat or through the maybe even unmute and ask. Let me just check whether that has been enabled. Okay, so let me begin. Now this live interaction part is open-ended, so those of you who need to leave can leave, and those of you who would like to stay and continue with the interaction can stay. Which says, what's your view when student comes with an exciting idea, but you are not an expert? That is, you don't have prior experience and or the skills or the knowledge to guide that research project. Is this a risk? So, to some extent, yes, it is a risk that the idea is exciting, but you don't have the prior experience. But what I have found is that I have been able to learn quickly enough, so the fact that you have been through the PhD process has given you some skills as a guide that you can quickly learn a new area. So depending upon how far away from your expertise the area is, the risk can be mitigated. So the short answer is yes, there is a risk, but associated with the risk there is also a great deal of fun. Because the student has come with an exciting idea. So by just the fact that you are calling it an exciting idea, it means that you are also excited by that idea. So there is a promise of fun and there is a risk, and being aware of the risk, one can navigate that situation. Another question is, what happens when the guide's position in the continuum changes or research area changes? Okay. So, like I mentioned, the guide's position is often specific for a student. So, like my position when I started out was extremely flexible. Okay. So, I was totally focused on what the student is learning and not so much on what problem we are working on. So slowly I realized that this is a very inefficient way of functioning, and it sometimes also creates confusion for the student because the student has to then go and find a problem and so on and so forth. Okay, so I moved from that position to a highly flexible agenda. So in the sense that there is a broad area in which I work and students are free to find problems of their interest within this broad area where there is a lot of flexibility. So the position does change. Now, what happens when you get a student who starts off by saying that, okay, I want to do this exploration, and later on, for whatever reason, is either not able to give the time or able to develop the skills required to do that exploration. So, what I do is that I sit down with the student and we renegotiate, saying that, okay, so much time has elapsed in the PhD and now there is a need to actually graduate. So, both of us agree on what should be the new position that we take. So, personally to me this has worked well. Okay, there is another point which says that it seems alignment requires metacognitive discoveries from both guide and student side. How long do you expect it to take to reach a satisfactory stage of alignment? This is a great question. So, yes, the point is that the metacognitive discoveries are important. How long it can take to reach a satisfactory stage is, it actually again depends upon their temperaments, right? If somebody refuses to budge from their position and makes the other person do all the work of the alignment, then it may take longer. If both people are kind of mutually agreeable and they are able to see each other's point, and then they will converge faster. If both people are adamant with their positions, then they are better off identifying what would be an alternative way to go about it. Oh, somebody has also answered this question. Ideally, as a guide, you try to give sufficient metacognitive prompts and see how the student is catching up. Okay, some somebody is asking, can this be a part of the first semester course within communication skills? It would help most of the students before choosing the guide. Well, that would be very so a portion of this course can be created which is student facing. Okay, right now this course is faculty facing. So all the discussion, all the slides that are made are oriented towards, are talking to a faculty. Okay, so if you want to use it for students, feel free to adopt slides from here, but you will need to modify them so that they are talking to the student rather than to the faculty. Okay, so you could use the course as a self-paced course for your university or college. How do you convince the student to align their interest? Okay, so in this case, again, it is not so much of a question of convincing the student to align their interest, but a matter of negotiating, what is your interest versus their interest, and coming to a shared understanding of where we want to go with the PhD, right? So one way could be that, you point out to the student the pros and cons of their position, the position that they have taken, as well as the pros and cons of the position that you are suggesting. So that could be one way you can get the student to align their interests. So at the end of the day, both you and the student need to understand that we are doing it for the best interests of the student. How does PhD differ from postdoc? Alright, so postdoc is when you've already got the degree and you are going deeper into the work as well as the mentoring aspect. So most postdocs learn a lot of these skills that I am talking about while in their postdoc journey, while they are mentoring some other PhDs and masters students. Any comparison with PhD guiding methodologies from Europe or US? So it's very hard to generalize for a comparison, but generally if we look at PhDs which are highly time bound or which are highly funding driven, then those ones will have to be, the student will have to put in more efforts to align with the guide, because the guide has constraints. Like I said, there are lots of constraints the guide has to take into account. So in this case, the guide may have constraints from the funding agency. The guide may have constraints of time. So in such a case, it is desirable or sometimes even required that the student align with the guide. Otherwise, it's just going to be frustration. On the other hand, in India, many students are funded by the ministry, right? They have their own scholarship, various types of scholarships. So the flexibility to explore is greater. Okay, and there is also a point of pedagogy versus andragogy. It's kind of, I'm using the term pedagogy to also include andragogy. So we are not making a very huge distinction between, we are not talking about children's education here. So it is the same as andragogy at this point. Okay. Can this workshop content, okay. What are the proper platforms for doing literature survey? So there are many. I think today with generative AI, there are nice techniques. So if you go to the EdTech Society's webpage, you will find to the YouTube channel, you will find a master class by my colleague Professor Shamantak Das, which actually does a great job of talking about how to do literature survey systematically using these generative AI tools. How can we help students prepare for diverse career paths, including non-academic ones? So that's an important one. So see, one way of doing that is to give them diverse exposure while they are a student. So it's not like you can one fine day get up and be ready for a career. So what we try to do is to create small opportunities where the student can learn those skills that are required for that other career, in a small way. So this is a training program, right? So as long as, so the mistakes can be made. So it is not very expensive to try out new ideas. For example, so many of our students have run conferences, many of them do sessions in faculty development programs, they go to NGOs for internships. So during the PhD process, they try out a lot of things. So we call them as secondary projects. So the primary project is their PhD thesis related work, and these are called as secondary projects. So one way to help students prepare for diverse career paths is to create multiple secondary project opportunities for students so that they can choose and do such projects and get their skills. Okay. How and where to identify new and emerging topics in a particular area? So this one seems to already be answered, saying we can look for journals in particular area for emerging ideas. Yes, engage in a research community, participate in conferences, brainstorm with AI platform is another way. So thanks for answering the question. Okay. Is it good to know beforehand whether PhD students want to join academics or industrial R&D, so that guide can mentor her or him based on the student's future goals? This may avoid conflicts from the beginning. Yes, it's good to know, but sometimes students' goals also change, right? So as they go, so many students, as they go through the PhD process, some of them may like it, so they may say that, okay, I want to go further in academics or further in research. Some of them may feel that this is not really my cup of tea, so when they may have wanted to do research when they came in, but later they may switch to a different kind of a role. So it is good to know what the student's initial goals are, and it's also good to periodically check with the student whether those goals are still the same or whether the goals are changing. And as a student, there's nothing wrong if your goals change. So it's just a matter of the student and the guide getting realigned on the new goals. Okay, how do you encourage innovation and independent thinking in students while ensuring they stay aligned with their research goals? Yes, so you need to find problems that are meaningful for them, right? So if we give students routine problems, then they will be able to get only up to routine thinking. So we have to give innovative problems to students for them to become independent thinkers and come up with innovative solutions, right? So while ensuring they stay aligned with their research goals, so here is where, as a guide, it becomes important to keep sight of the fact that the student has to graduate. We cannot keep on exploring. The PhD, as many people say, the PhD is like a driver's license for research. So you need to get the license and you need to move on. So what is important is to let the student explore, at the same time provide a kind of a safety net for the student in case the exploration does not, it goes all over the place, right? So by safety net, what do I mean? I mean that you have also spent time thinking about it, and you know that, okay, if the directions that the student is exploring don't work out, you have some backup plans, right? So that is one way to encourage independent thinking while ensuring that they stay aligned with the research goals. So typically I encourage students to explore for the first 2 years of their thesis. From the 3rd year onwards, we start narrowing down, and by the time the student is in the 5th year, we are both are in the mode of saying, let's get this done. Okay. Is there any ideal time schedule for MTech projects? Generally, it is started at the beginning of 2nd year. Yeah, I think that depends on, varies from institute to institute. I guess depending on your institute, yeah, it could be at the beginning of 2nd year. I think beginning of 2nd year also makes sense, because there is the notion of doing the coursework and gaining the expertise in order to do a small research project, which is basically what the EdTech project is. Okay, can Google Scholar Science Direct based literature survey be considered comprehensive? Yes, if it is done in a systematic manner. So again, there are various ways to do this. There is the Prisma method that you can use to do systematic literature survey, and getting into details of literature survey is beyond the scope of this discussion. Okay, gap in science PhDs and engineering PhDs in India. Are there any different approaches to be followed? So actually I don't know what this gap that you are talking about is. So I don't know if it's possible to expand on what you mean by this gap. I mean, to my awareness, I come from a CS background, I know that, and now I work in education technology, and that's pretty much my frame of knowledge here. Okay, so there is another question on if there are 4 students in a project group which we are guiding, and if we are publishing research outcome, who could be the first and last authors? So this is an important question, and here again there are a lot of guidelines that are there. So many journals themselves give guidelines on how to decide who should be first author, who should be second author. It depends upon how much contribution different people have made in terms of the idea, in terms of the execution, in terms of the analysis. Maybe the guide has contributed in terms of reviewing, or in terms of making some funds available for carrying out the project. So all kinds of contributions have to be considered, and there are guidelines which are given by different journals which you can look at to find out how to determine first author, second author. There is no single correct answer here. Okay, there is a follow-up which says if all 4 students contributed equally in work and guide identifies a research work. Again, it's very hard to give a broad answer. So if I were the guide, I would say that I would be the last author, and even though all 4 students contributed equally, there is likely to be one student who had more ownership of the problem, who had more ownership of the work. That student would be the first author. If nothing works, then one can go with an alphabetical order and say that. So nowadays some journals also allow saying that there are 2 authors who have equal contribution as first author. Okay. What kind of continuum will you recommend for problems brought in by students that are more socially relevant but which may not be an easy problem to solve? Okay, so this itself is a hard question. So what I would recommend here is to attempt to scope the problem quickly. So the goals of solving socially relevant problems are slightly tangential to the goals of academic research. Okay, so when we are talking about solving socially relevant problems, we are talking about impact, we are talking about making a difference. So it is possible that some rigor is lower when we are doing this kind of work, because what we want to see is the impact out there. Now on the other hand, when we bring it into the PhD process, it is not possible to compromise on the rigor. So one solution here could be to scope the problem. So you find a socially relevant problem and you draw boundaries of saying that, okay, this is the portion of the problem that I am going to solve within the PhD, in which case it has to be done with, let's say for example, in a very small scale. So the socially relevant problem might be, let's say at the scale of at millions, let's say, but you may say that, look, I am going to solve it at the scale of hundreds, and look at do that in a pilot mode for the larger problem. So what you do within the PhD, it becomes the input to actually doing the socially relevant problem outside the PhD. And I agree that it may not be easy to solve, it may be a hard thesis, it may also be necessary to find suitable fora in which it can be published, but it is greatly satisfying when one attempts to do such a thesis, both for the student and for the guide. Okay, so that seems to have, so I have exhausted all the questions that have come on chat. Request to administrators, a group can be created with the attendees of the session. We can discuss if we encounter any doubts, so that we will leave to the NPTEL. Okay, let me see, is there a way to unmute? Is there a way to unmute? I don't think I have the permissions. Okay, there was a button which said ask all to unmute. I have clicked that. So if it's possible to unmute now, you can, you can speak. Okay, we will wait for another 5 minutes to see if there are any more queries, and then we can sign off. Can we save the chat transcripts, or will a PDF be sent? I don't know. I think maybe just make your own local copy to be on the safe side. So I have allowed everybody to unmute. So in case you want, you can unmute and speak. There's one more question. What is the role of good command of fundamentals in the broad subject area for the student in completing one's PhD successfully? This is an important question, and like I mentioned in one of the slides, the role of subject knowledge cannot be understated. Okay. So in this workshop, I have focused more on the human aspect of guiding a PhD student, but the subject knowledge plays a huge role in completing one's PhD effectively and successfully, and it is important to ensure that the students do gain that subject knowledge, because it's only on the basis of that knowledge that they can either make more progress in the research or go ahead for teaching the subject. So yeah, that goes without saying that the subject knowledge plays a very huge role. I wish such a type of PhD program is done for PhD scholars even before they begin with their coursework. So looks like there are no further questions, and
hello, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, thank you for your clarifications for all our doubts, sir. I have a small question. In some institutes, we are supposed to give mini projects at the beginning of third semester for the BTech, and at the end of 7th semester, beginning of 7th semester, we are supposed to give the main project. So could you please discuss how to differentiate between the, how could be a mini project, the duration, the scope, everything, how it is different from the main project, and how the BTech project should be different from MTech project. How?
Okay. So see, again, this varies from institute to institute. So in my experience, a mini project is something that a student should be able to do in a semester while doing some other courses also. So it's really a small investigation. It need not be very comprehensive. So for example, the student may just have one idea and may say that, okay, I am going to write a program for something, or I am going to investigate this idea. Or it may simply be that, okay, it could also be of the type of a seminar, where the student does a survey of area and writes up a systematic literature survey. So that also could be considered as a mini project in some institutes. Okay. So going from the mini project to a BTech project, which is a much longer project, the idea is that the student should make some substantial work either from a development perspective or from a research perspective, right? So it could be, so the work need not be so original. The work can be replicative, or it can be like, for example, let's say, to take an example from computer science, let's say a BTech project could be the building of an e-commerce website at some point, for a new condition. So it is, so the the how to do the project may be well known, but it may be new for the student. So, and that is sufficient learning that will happen for that student in that setting. So, when you go from a BTech project then to an MTech project, so in the MTech case, the requirement for novelty increases in terms of the research aspect. So, simply replicating or simply developing something may not be sufficient. It may be necessary for looking at the related work in a closer way to position the entire work. And then when we go to a PhD, it becomes very important to ensure that you are aware of all that has happened in the field and you are able to position yourself well. Okay, here is a question. I find my teaching duties take up a lot of time. How do I ensure that I spend quality time for research and interaction with PhD students? Yes, it's true for everyone that whether it be teaching duties or other duties, time, one has to find the time. So, one has to be creative. For example, when I was early in my career, I had a little more time. So, and I would be able to talk to PhD students, spend a lot of open-ended time, talk to them about philosophical aspects and so on and so forth. And as time progressed, more and more administrative duties and all as they came on, this time kept getting compressed. So, for today's students, what I have is a model by which I go for lunch with a student. So, it's the lunch time where we talk about what other things other than their thesis. So, that is one way you could do things, or if you and the students happen to stay in the same campus, you could meet them at home, right. So, I know of a professor who used to have student meetings at 8 p.m. So, and a different student would show up every day at 8 p.m. Okay. So, those are ways in which one can find time for interacting with students. So, doing one's own research, again the same thing, one has to prioritize that time. So, we know that matrix of important versus urgent task, right. So, doing one's own, finding time for one's own research is important, but it may not be urgent with respect to your college's demands. So, which means it has to be scheduled. You have to be disciplined and schedule some time for that. Okay, there is some other question which says IITB Professor D. Manjunath's paper on engineering PhDs in premier institution, what's the slope on improving? So, I have not read that paper unfortunately, so I cannot comment on it, but I do know Manjunath quite well, I will talk to him about that. Thank you for letting me know about this. How to judge if a PhD work is good? Okay, this is a very subjective judgment, right. So, there are some objective metrics such as the quality of the journal in which you are publishing, the citations that you get, the impact factor, all those things. So, those are all objective criteria which people have tried to come up with to judge something that is essentially a subjective work. Okay. So, other ways in which you could judge is to actually look at the work and see what is the nature of the problem that has been taken up. So, personally speaking, sometimes when a student takes up a hard problem, the hardness is not just in the solving of the problem, it is also in the publishing of the results or the publishing of the solution. So, I would say that you have to do a trade-off between the type of the problem that has been chosen, the abilities of the student. So, if the student's abilities have improved dramatically, even though the work may not have been so significant from a global perspective, I would still say that it's a good PhD. So, this is a very subjective call. Each guide has to take their own call on judging if the PhD work is good. If you want objective criteria, then the one that is most commonly used is publications. Okay, so I think we are coming to the close of the session, and maybe one more minute I will wait. 12:55. Okay. I do experimental research. I am setting up my lab and it's taking time. How do you engage students in this time? This is a hard question. So I don't have much experience with laboratory setting up labs and so on. So I really am not qualified to answer this question. But just kind of thinking aloud, you could look for some alternatives. For example, if simulations are possible, or if thought experiments are possible. So yeah, I don't have better answer than that. Okay, so it's 12:55, it's 5 minutes to the close of the session. So thank you everybody for joining. I hope it has been useful for you, and I do hope to see all of you join back again tomorrow, and hopefully tomorrow this glitch will not be there of starting up. Yeah, so see you tomorrow, and please do the assignment. It's not for the certification or for me, it is a reflection exercise which will help you. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining.